Tether just dropped a bomb on the Bitcoin mining industry, and nobody saw it coming. The stablecoin giant that prints billions of dollars worth of USDT just announced they're releasing an open-source mining operating system called MOS. And this isn't some weekend project by a couple of developers. This is a full-scale invasion into territory that's been controlled by billion-dollar mining corporations who've spent years building their empires on proprietary technology and closed ecosystems. Let's be brutally honest here. Tether releasing free mining software is like a fox building a henhouse and inviting all the chickens inside. This is the same company that's been dodged regulatory bullets for years, sitting on mountains of USDT backed by God knows what. And now, they want to control the infrastructure layer of Bitcoin mining. Think about that for a second. The entity that controls the most widely used stablecoin in crypto now wants its software running on mining farms across the planet. What could possibly go wrong? The announcement came during some event in El Salvador, a country that's basically become Tether's playground. Paulo Arduino, Tether's CEO, is standing there talking about democratizing mining and reducing barriers to entry, like he's some kind of open-source hero. But let's cut through the marketing nonsense. Tether made over $10 billion in profit last year. That's billion with a B. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're positioning themselves to have their fingers in every pie in the crypto ecosystem. And if you can't see that, you're not paying attention. Here's what MOS supposedly does. It replaces all the fragmented software that miners currently use with one unified system. Instead of juggling separate programs for monitoring hash rate, managing power consumption, controlling cooling systems, and tracking equipment health, everything runs through one platform. Sounds convenient, right? Maybe too convenient. Because when one piece of software controls everything, whoever controls that software has leverage. And in this case, that's Tether. The timing of this launch is absolutely fascinating. Bitcoin miners are getting absolutely destroyed right now. The network hash rate exploded from around 800 exahash per second at the start of last year to over 1,000 exahash by October. Mining difficulty hit record levels, while the block reward got halved to 3.125 Bitcoin. Transaction fees collapsed, and suddenly miners found themselves in a profit squeeze unlike anything they've experienced before. Hash price dropped to somewhere between $35 and $40 per petahash per day, while their actual costs were around $44. Some of these publicly traded mining companies are operating in the red, loaded up with debt from buying new equipment and upgrading infrastructure. So Tether shows up right when miners are desperate, bleeding money, looking for any way to cut costs and improve efficiency. And what do they offer? Free software that promises to optimize everything. It's classic predatory timing. Come in when the industry is weak, offer a solution that seems too good to be true, and get everyone dependent on your technology. Then, what happens down the road when Tether decides to monetize this somehow, or leverage their position in ways we can't even imagine yet? The whole pitch is that MOS treats every component of a mining operation as a coordinated worker within one operating system. Hardware, power, cooling, logistics, everything synchronized in real time. They're saying you can deploy this on small operations or massive industrial sites running hundreds of thousands of machines. It's modular, it's peer-to-peer, it doesn't rely on centralized third-party providers. Except, of course, it relies on Tether, which is about as centralized as it gets in crypto. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Tether says they're releasing something called a mining SDK alongside the operating system. A software development kit that will be open-sourced to the community. So now we're not just talking about Tether providing the software, we're talking about them establishing the foundational architecture that other developers will build on top of. They're setting the standards. They're creating the ecosystem. And once that happens, good luck getting miners to switch to anything else. Let's talk about what open source really means in this context. Sure, the code is theoretically available for anyone to inspect and modify. But how many mining operators actually have the technical expertise to audit complex operating system code? How many have the resources to maintain their own fork if they don't like something Tether does? The reality is that most operators are going to download MOS, install it, and trust that it does what Tether says it does. That's not decentralization. That's dependence with extra steps. The big mining companies must be losing their minds right now. Companies like Bitmain and MicroBT have spent years developing proprietary software that gives them competitive advantages. They bundle their software with their hardware and create these integrated systems that lock customers into their ecosystem. Now, Tether is giving away software for free that allegedly does the same thing or better. This completely undercuts their business model. Either they adapt and somehow compete with free, or they watch as their market share gets eaten alive. But here's the thing that should really concern people. Tether is expanding into everything. They issue USDT, which is the backbone of crypto trading liquidity. They've got tokenized gold. They're partnering with payment systems. They reported over $10 billion in profit last year from their stablecoin operations alone. And now they want to control mining infrastructure too. At what point does Tether become too powerful? At what point does their influence over multiple critical layers of the crypto stack become a systemic risk? Bitcoin was supposed to be decentralized. It was supposed to eliminate the need to trust any single entity. But if a huge portion of mining operations end up running software controlled by one company that also happens to issue the most dominant stablecoin in the entire crypto market, we've created exactly the kind of centralization point that Bitcoin was designed to avoid. It doesn't matter if the software is technically open source, if everyone is running the same version provided by the same entity. Some people will argue that having free, accessible mining software is good for decentralization because it lowers barriers to entry. Smaller operators who couldn't afford expensive proprietary systems can now compete with the big players. That sounds nice in theory, but in practice, what you're doing is creating a monoculture. When everyone runs the same software, a vulnerability in that software affects everyone simultaneously. A backdoor in that software gives whoever controls it leverage over the entire network. And let's not forget that Tether has never been fully transparent about their reserves or their operations. The regulatory heat on Tether has been intense for years. They've settled with the New York Attorney General. They've faced scrutiny from multiple jurisdictions about whether their USDT is actually backed by real dollars. They've been remarkably successful at avoiding serious consequences, but that doesn't mean they're in the clear. And now, they're embedding themselves even deeper into crypto infrastructure at a time when regulators are paying closer attention to the industry than ever before. If Tether ever does face serious regulatory action, what happens to all the mining operations that have become dependent on their software? The network hash rate has actually dropped recently to below 1,000 exahash, down to around 870 in some readings. That's the first time it's been that low since September. Mining difficulty has adjusted downward multiple times. Hash price has shown some modest improvement, so conditions are starting to get slightly better for miners, but they're still operating on razor-thin margins. In that environment, the temptation to adopt free software that promises better efficiency is going to be overwhelming. Tether knows this. They're counting on it. And let's address the elephant in the room. Tether operates in regulatory gray areas. They're incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. Their banking relationships have always been murky. They've never submitted to a full public audit, despite years of people demanding one. This is the entity that you're potentially going to trust with control over your mining infrastructure. Does that seem wise? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a disaster waiting to happen. The plan to make this a community-driven, open-source project sounds great, until you realize that Tether still controls the core development. They decide what features get prioritized. They decide what security measures get implemented. They have the resources to contribute far more developer time than anyone else, which means they effectively control the direction of the project, even if it's technically open to contributions. This is how corporate open source always works. The company that funds the majority of development calls the shots. Mining companies are already struggling with debt, with depreciating hardware, with energy costs that eat into their already thin margins. The last thing they need is to become dependent on software from a company with questionable transparency and massive conflicts of interest throughout the crypto ecosystem. But desperation makes people do irrational things, and the mining sector is desperate right now. Tether is taking advantage of that desperation, pure and simple. This isn't about helping miners. This isn't about decentralization. This is about market dominance and vertical integration. Tether wants to be essential to every layer of crypto infrastructure, and they're using their massive profits from USDT to fund expansion into adjacent markets. Today, it's mining software. Tomorrow, it could be something else. And each move gives them more leverage, more data, more control over the networks that are supposed to be decentralized. The Bitcoin mining industry is about to make a choice. They can stick with expensive proprietary systems from companies that at least have clear business incentives, or they can adopt free software from a stablecoin issuer with opaque operations and regulatory question marks hanging over them. Neither option is great, but one of them involves handing over operational control to an entity that already has too much power in crypto. Welcome to the future of Bitcoin mining, where decentralization goes to die and Tether pulls the strings.